This is Land of Havilah, 2 Chronicles 30. In the last chapter, Hezekiah pursued Yahweh first thing. He opened the temple doors, repaired them, and called the priests and Levites to return to their duties. Those who responded consecrated themselves. They cleansed the temple and reestablished regular service to Yahweh, which took them from the 1st of the month to the 16th of the month. They missed Passover, which should have been on the 14th. Now verse 1. Hezekiah sent to all Israel and Judah, and wrote letters also to Ephraim and Manasseh, that they should come to Yahweh's house at Jerusalem to keep the Passover to Yahweh, the God of Israel. For the king had taken counsel with his princes and all the assembly in Jerusalem to keep the Passover in the 2nd month, for they could not keep it at that time because the priests had not sanctified themselves in sufficient number, and the people had not gathered themselves together to Jerusalem. Comment in verse 1, Hezekiah notified all Israel and Judah that the Passover would be kept in Jerusalem on the 14th day of the 2nd month of the year, which is the make-up date for it in the law of Moses, Numbers 9, verses 10 and 11. So he was reaching beyond Judah into Israel. Turning attention to what's been going on in Israel, Hoshea is king at the moment, 2 Kings 18:1. In the days of the king before him, the Assyrian mega-kingdom conquered Galilee and carried the people away captive, 2 Kings 15:29, and at some point, Assyria conquered the Transjordanian Israelite tribes and took them captive, 1 Chronicles 5:26. So Hoshea in Israel was ruling over a greatly reduced Israel, which consisted of Ephraim and Manasseh, also known as Samaria. But back to Hezekiah in Judah, his invitation to the Passover extended to Hoshea's Samaria in verse 1, and we'll come to find out further in the chapter that it extended into Assyrian-controlled Galilee. There must be some Israelites there who've somehow escaped deportation. About Hezekiah scheduling the Passover to take place on the make-up date, and about him extending the invitation beyond Judah, verse 4. The thing was right in the eyes of the king and of all the assembly. So they established a decree to make a proclamation throughout all Israel, from Beersheba even to Dan, that they should come to keep the Passover to Yahweh, the God of Israel, at Jerusalem, for they had not kept it in great numbers in the way it was written. Comment, Beersheba to Dan includes all Judah, Samaria, and Galilee. In verse 5, they hadn't kept the Passover in great numbers the way it was written. There might have been some households who observed it in a makeshift sort of way, but no one could keep it according to the law even if he wanted, because that would require a functioning temple and priesthood, Deuteronomy 12:5-14. Coming up, the wording of the letter that Hezekiah sent to Judah, Samaria, and Galilee, verse 6. So the couriers went with the letters from the king and his princes throughout all Israel and Judah, and according to the commandment of the king, saying, You children of Israel, turn again to Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, that he may return to the remnant of you that have escaped out of the hand of the kings of Assyria. Don't be like your fathers and like your brothers who trespassed against Yahweh, the God of their fathers, so that he gave them up to desolation, as you see. Now don't be stiff-necked as your fathers were, but yield yourselves to Yahweh and enter into his sanctuary, which he sanctified forever, and serve Yahweh your God, that his fierce anger may turn away from you. For if you turn again to Yahweh, your brothers and your children will find compassion before those who led them captive, and will come again into this land, because Yahweh your God is gracious and merciful, and will not turn away his face from you if you return to him. Comment, for the previous several hundred years, citizens of the northern kingdom have generally been unwilling and unable to come to Jerusalem to worship. At times their kings have forbidden them from coming and shut off the border, 1 Kings 15:17. But there weren't many who would come if they had the chance, because Israel was completely overrun with idolatry. In the time of Elijah, Yahweh said he had only 7,000 faithful in Israel, 1 Kings 19:18. So they were likely to reject Hezekiah's invitation, but Hezekiah sent it anyway. Indeed, as the couriers took the invitation north, verse 10, So the couriers passed from city to city through the country of Ephraim and Manasseh, even to Zebulun, but the people ridiculed them and mocked them. Nevertheless, some men of Asher and Manasseh and of Zebulun humbled themselves and came to Jerusalem. Comment, some responded all the way up to Asher, which is in the far north of Galilee. Coming up, Judah responded very well because God moved them. Verse 12. Also the hand of God came on Judah to give them one heart to do the commandment of the king and of the princes by Yahweh's word. Comment, coming up, the crowds gathering in Jerusalem, which is still defiled by pagan altars that Hezekiah's father set up. 2 Chronicles 28:24. Verse 13. Many people assembled at Jerusalem to keep the feast of unleavened bread in the second month, a very great assembly. They arose and took away the altars that were in Jerusalem, and they took all the altars for incense and threw them into the brook Kidron. Comment, now the celebration of the Passover according to the law. Verse 15. Then they killed the Passover on the 14th day of the second month. The priests and the Levites were ashamed and sanctified themselves and brought burnt offerings into Yahweh's house. They stood in their place after their order, according to the law of Moses, the man of God. The priests sprinkled the blood which they received of the hand of the Levites. For there were many in the assembly who had not sanctified themselves. Therefore the Levites were in charge of killing the Passovers for everyone who was not clean, to sanctify them to Yahweh. For a multitude of the people, even many of Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun, had not cleansed themselves, yet they ate the Passover other than the way it is written. For Hezekiah had prayed for them, saying, May the good Yahweh pardon everyone who sets his heart to seek God, Yahweh, the God of his fathers, even if they aren't clean according to the purification of the sanctuary. Comment, that was a touching section that many Israelites came to Jerusalem who had been out of touch with Yahweh for so long. They had no idea what they were doing except that they were seeking God. It was like Skid Row coming to church. They had no clue how to ceremonially cleanse themselves according to the law so that they could rightfully observe the Passover. But Hezekiah prayed for them, saying, quote, May the good Yahweh pardon everyone who sets his heart to seek Yahweh, the God of his fathers, even if they aren't clean according to the purification of the sanctuary, end quote, which means according to the procedures that make a person ceremonially clean. It was a triumph of grace over law. In verse 15, quote, the priests and Levites were ashamed, end quote. Something was awakening in them. Yahweh was granting them a spirit of repentance. Verse 20. Yahweh listened to Hezekiah and healed the people. Comment, coming up, immediately following the Passover on the 14th, there was the week-long Feast of Unleavened Bread. Verse 21. The children of Israel who were present at Jerusalem kept the Feast of Unleavened Bread 7 days with great gladness. The Levites and the priests praised Yahweh day by day, singing with loud instruments to Yahweh. Hezekiah spoke encouragingly to all the Levites who had good understanding in the service of Yahweh. Comment, even some of the Levites were so rusty they didn't know all the procedure, but some had good understanding. Still in verse 22. So they ate throughout the feast for the 7 days, offering sacrifices of peace offerings and making confession to Yahweh, the God of their fathers. Comment, the feast was so well received, verse 23. The whole assembly took counsel to keep another 7 days, and they kept another 7 days with gladness. For Hezekiah king of Judah gave to the assembly for offerings 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep, and the princes gave to the assembly 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep, and a great number of priests sanctified themselves. Comment, even during the feast, more priests responded to Yahweh's call. The consecration to the priesthood took 7 days, during which they could never leave the temple, 2 Chronicles 29:17. In verse 23, the people ate free on Hezekiah and on the leading men of the nation. The 2,000 bulls and 17,000 sheep they provided were for peace offerings, which meant only a small portion of the animal went to the altar and the rest was for eating. Leviticus 3, verse 25. All the assembly of Judah, with the priests and the Levites, and all the assembly who came out of Israel, and the foreigners who came out of the land of Israel and who lived in Judah, rejoiced. Comment, foreigners could eat the Passover if they circumcised themselves first, Exodus 12:48, verse 26. So there was great joy in Jerusalem, for since the time of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, there was nothing like this in Jerusalem. Comment, Solomon dedicated the temple in the month of the Feast of Tabernacles, The feast was supposed to last 7 days, but because of the assembly's joy, they celebrated 14 days, 1 Kings 8:65. Hezekiah's first Passover was something similar to that. Coming up, part of the job of the priests and Levites was to pronounce blessings, Numbers 6:23. Verse 27, Then the priests and the Levites arose and blessed the people. Their voice was heard, and their prayer came up to his holy habitation, even to heaven. Comment, heaven has taken notice. 2 Chronicles 31 is next.